What to read when it's all getting a bit too much, when you just can't quite cope and you want to take to your reading nook, you want to disappear away from the world into a book. What do you read on a day when it's all getting a bit too much? I'm just sorting out my technology here. I'm in a slightly different place to normal because I'm doing this special one all about what to do when it's all getting a bit too much. So apologies if I'm being slightly cat-candid. Great to see you, Helen and Nat. Thanks for joining me, and lovely to see people coming in on Facebook too. Do tell me if anyone has any issues with sound quality because I've got a slightly different setup, so do let me know. So I've decided rather than hiding behind my lovely sleep mask, stolen from one of my children, and rather than simply sitting all evening with the cucumbers over my eyes, I would get hold of a lovely fluffy rabbit. Not, on the other hand, this rather terrifying wolf whose eyes have been taken out, who has actually starred on one of these sessions before. He was attacked by the dog when the dog was quite small. I'm cuddling a lovely rabbit and having a kind of duvet day session of bibliotherapy. And I'd love to know if you have thoughts about what would be your books to turn to when it's all getting a bit too much. I've already had a couple of people sending in suggestions, which is really lovely. I had Anna um, suggesting Tiny Beautiful Things, Advice on Life from Dream Sugar, I think it's called. I've scrolled it down very quickly because she wrote it under my Instagram post very kindly. Anna, if you're there, do put it on an Instagram comment again if you could, because that's really great as a suggestion. And also, what you can see from here, she also suggested as another book to read when you're feeling. Oh, you said it sounds a bit iffy. Thank you. I'm going to adjust my phone then. I think it's probably because I've propped it up on my computer. That's probably what it is. So thanks for telling me that, Nat. Um, yes, so Anna was suggesting What You Can See From Here as another book that she's turned to when everything's all getting a bit too much. And Anna very kindly also mentioned The Novel Cure, which she said is a book that really helped her when she's been finding that things are getting a bit too much. So not wanting to blow our own trumpet too much, but I might just start by mentioning in the Novel Cure, we do have a list of the 10 best books for duvet days. I'm actually going to move this rabbit, lovely though it is, because I'm actually getting really hot. It's one of those days where you just don't know whether it's hot or cold. And yes, do keep me informed about how the sound quality is going. So we do have a list of books for duvet days in the Novel Cure, which is under PMT. And when I was looking at it, looking for this evening, I was thinking we should just have it under duvet days because obviously PMT is very important and many people go through it, but even more people go through just having a duvet day and feeling like things are all a bit too much, generally speaking. So the 10 best novels for duvet days that we have as a list here are, just to go through them briefly, The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, love that, so good. The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, which is very much about women's issues, PMT, having children. It's quite an epic book about what it was like to be a woman back in the time, in biblical times. We've got The Great Coat by Helen Dunmore, The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, The Edge of Reason by Helen Fielding, Helen Fielding clearly is the queen of the duvet day, and Bridget Jones's Diary could be all you need for a great duvet day, frankly. She does make you laugh, and she's just great, and she's just having one big duvet day herself. Then we have The Grand Sophie by Georgette Heyer. Fantastic read for a duvet day. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. No, I didn't. It's not that. My eyes are going funny. It's actually The Unbearable Lightness of Scones by Alexander McCall Smith. Classic. The Unbearable Lightness of Being is an amazing book, but I wouldn't say it's your perfect read for when you're feeling like it's all getting a bit too much, because it might just send you over the edge. We've also got Where Do You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple, which is another fantastic duvet day read, and The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood by Rebecca Wells, which I do totally love and refer to quite frequently. So they're all marvellous and excellent duvet day books. But I'd love to know if you have any other favourites that you would turn to. In fact, if you're feeling like everything's all a bit too much, you might actually turn to a crime thriller rather than a cozy, comfortable book, because you might want to escape into something that's completely gripping, thrilling, and taking you away from it all. And I did a rather fabulous workshop today in Crystal Palace, in Crystal Palace Football Stadium, which was rather marvellous. And I had the joy of meeting lots of social workers, and they were saying that they actually love reading crime fiction or true crime when they're feeling a bit down, because it's a really good escape. I think Harper might be having the same idea, that it can be a great thing to read a horror story when you are feeling like things are getting a bit too much. James Herbert is a really good writer of horror stories, who I was also bonding with one of the social workers about today, because he loves to read James Herbert when he's feeling a bit down, because those are books which are really gripping, not necessarily in a positive way, but they really keep you pinned to the page and make you want to keep flicking through the pages and stay in your bed all day, which is lovely. Nat, thanks for your comment, saying misread Fairacre novels are so comforting. A lovely safe world to go into. I haven't read them. I'm going to look them up. Thank you for that excellent tip. Misread Fairacre novels. They sound really good. Nat, could you tell us, where are they set? Are they British, or are they Scottish, or are they American, or are they somewhere that I just don't know? I would definitely read them. Thank you, Nat. That's a really good one. And actually, that does make me think of Alexander McCall Smith generally. He does write really great, comforting reads, which I know a lot of people go to when they're feeling like things are all a bit much. It's a fictional British village, you say? Ooh, fantastic. I'm loving it more and more. I'm definitely going to discover those, and I will report back to you on how they go down. So, thinking of duvet days, as well as generally books that take you away from it all. Oh, getting another comment here from Helen. I like magical realism like Sarah Addison Allen, or Mena van Prague, or Alice Hoffman, or a cozy read like Jenny Colgan and Phaedra Patrick. Fantastic. They're all brilliant suggestions. And actually, just to be slightly low tech, I'm going to quickly take a screenshot of that, because the comments disappear. So sorry if that made a weird flash for you. So yes, magical realism I love, and I'm just wondering if I've got any magical realism in my collection tonight. But before I move on to the books I've brought to you, I just want to mention a couple. There's a book called Duvet Day by Rachel Kerr, which is a really lovely duvet day read, which I don't actually have it here, but I've heard it on audio. Oh, thanks Harper for that comment about the comments. But the thing with the comments is they disappear at the end completely, unless I'm wrong. Tell me if I am. Anyway, um, Duvet Day by Rachel Kerr, lovely book, which is one of those books that lots of people say you start reading and you just can't stop. You plan to read just one chapter over breakfast, and the next thing you know, you spent the whole day reading it. And it is a great premise for a book because it's the idea is that the heroine takes a day off, having a duvet day, pulling a sickie essentially, and then things start going horribly wrong in her life, and it's a bit of a farce because she gets locked out of her house wearing a ridiculous shark onesie, and that's how it all begins to go wrong. She's called Alexa. She's a junior lawyer in a prestigious London law firm, deciding to have a duvet day. Unfortunately, things don't turn out well as she gets locked out of her flat wearing a unicorn onesie. Sorry, not a shark one. Then ensues a day of mayhem rather than her hoped for rest, chasing after a news photographer who snapped her in her embarrassing pajamas. And you can kind of see where it's going. It's very funny. It's a light, lovely, brilliant read. It is called Duvet Day, and it's all about a woman having a duvet day. And it's kind of very funny and farcical in a Bridget Jones style. And it's a really fun read. Another one, in a way, in a similar vein, is The Wangs versus the World by Jade Chang, which is another hilarious and charming novel that follows a once wealthy Chinese family who become bankrupt, and they take a road trip to see their eldest daughter, who's the only one in the family who's got any money left. And it becomes this kind of crazy road trip story following the Wangs around America. And the hero, Charles Wang, himself is mad at America. He's a brash, big-hearted immigrant businessman who built a cosmetics empire and made a fortune, but it's just been ruined by the financial crisis. Now he wants to get the kids safely stowed away so he can go to China and attempt to reclaim his family's ancestral lands and his pride. So that is a really fun and enjoyable, easy read, which actually I have to say is very much a similar, whoops, sorry, I'll just close that. It's very much a similar story to the amazing and brilliant Mel Guedroids book, The Best Things, which is a really fabulous book all about a British family who are extremely wealthy and who lose all their money and then have to cope with what happens when they are horribly poor, and how they actually, of course, discover that love is what holds them together. And it is a really great read. If you like Bake Off, you would love Mel Gedroyd's book, The Best Things, which is a really excellent read. And I do feel it's definitely in the same vein as the book I was just talking about, The Wangs versus the World by Jade Chang, which is another really excellent read. And both of those books are ones that take you out of your own concerns and stresses when you're feeling like everything's all become a bit too much and you just want to hide, put on your bath cap, wear your cucumber slices over your eyes, and generally hide from the world. And that's what we're looking for in the books that we're talking about tonight. Do tell me if you've got any particular favourites too. Another of my favourites of books that help you to escape when it's all becoming too much and you're feeling like you can't cope with too many things going on in your life is Michelle Faber's The Crimson Petal and the White, which is a superb read. It's quite a big old heavy tome, as you can see. I think it is at least 800 pages long, and although it's so long, it's an absolutely gripping read, which takes you into the mind of a 13-year-old prostitute called Sugar. And it starts off with her Thank you, Helen, saying I love that book. I love it too. It's one of my all-time favourites. It's such a good read, and it's one that's great to go back to as well. And you totally get into her head, and you slowly discover that she has a lot of unexpected thoughts going on, quite murderous thoughts about the men that she has to sleep with. And she's forced to become a prostitute from a very early age, only 13. And it's all about how she tries to rise above her station in Victorian times, in Victorian London. It's very gritty, it's very much set in a London that you can completely believe in. And I find it totally captivating, and I think you will too. It also has a very unusual beginning because the narrative voice is literally talking to you at the very beginning, which is quite disconcerting. Books written in the second person. But as the book goes on, it becomes does it change? I feel it does. It does. It goes into the third person, and so you feel somehow more comfortable with the narrator. Anyway, that is a great read. So that's kind of escapism in a historical context, and a book that I very much love when I'm feeling like everything's all getting a bit too much. Another one that I really love, and oddly enough was the one I immediately thought of when I was thinking about this subject, is Barbara Comyn's Our Spoons Came from Woolworths. I wonder if any of you have read that, because I absolutely love it. One of my favourites, quite short, in contrast to the Crimson Petal and the White. Helen, excellent, saying that you love it too. Hurrah. It's such a funny book that is very unexpected, and Barbara Comyns writes in a very simple, unexpected way. She's very funny. And this book is all about Sophia, a 21-year-old who is known for carrying a newt around with her called Great Warty in her pocket. And she rather hastily marries a young man called Charles, who's an artist. And he's very bohemian, doesn't ever think about money, comes from a wealthy family, but they disown him and her when he gets married so hastily. And I love their life together, which isn't by any means all roses. It's actually really sad. They have quite a lot of tragedy. So it's not a happy book. And I did wonder why I thought of it as being my book to go to when everything seems a bit much. And to be honest, it's partly because everything is too much for her. She's a young woman, gets pregnant, has children, has this really infuriating bohemian husband who is absolutely no help at all. And yet she manages to remain um, permanently positive, a bit like Mehetabel in the book Archie and Mehetabel that I know I've talked to you about before. Mehetabel is a cat who has the soul of Cleopatra, and she always says, "Toujours gay, Archie, toujours gay," because she's always gay, happy, no matter what's going on in her highly complicated life. So Sophia in this book also is toujours gay, even though often quite awful things are happening around her. And I'm just going to read you a little section of the book that I particularly, that I think gives you a good flavour of it and shows you her unique attitude to life. At the end of a week, I packed all our things to be ready in case Edmund sent a telegram to say he was coming. Edmund is her husband. But nothing happened, and John and Joyce began to exchange glances, and they would ask me at breakfast if I had had any letters. One morning, Joyce said, "Poor Charles, he's been on his own for over a month now. Are you sure you haven't quarrelled?" After this, I wrote Charles another letter, asking him to borrow enough money for me to return to London. But he wrote in return he'd been so poor he'd sold the rocking chair and pawned the silver teapot. Another week passed, and I felt so dreadfully I had outstayed my welcome. They never said outright, "When on earth are you going?" but made remarks about spring cleaning the spare room after I'd gone. I tried to ask them for a little money to go home with, but I didn't want them to know how poor we were, and they would have been so shocked. I only needed about 15 shillings. John was one of those nervy people who hate knowing the truth. Sometimes when he returned in the evening, he would say to his wife, Has anything happened while I've been away? If it has, please don't tell me about it. I suddenly thought the only thing to do would be to walk back. It was only 100 miles, and I would surely get a lift on the way. So I packed all our clothes again and wrote a little note asking them to be asking them to be sent GWR COD. I just left out a few nappies to change on the way. I planned to leave the next morning very early and take a loaf and 2 oranges to eat on the way. When I'd finished packing, the gong went for dinner, and I ran downstairs feeling quite happy and determined to eat a good meal that would last a long time. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the maid was asking someone into the drawing room, and it was Edmund. He said he was in a great hurry, but if I could be ready in 5 minutes, he would take me back to London with him. So I didn't wait for dinner, but bundled Sandro into a shawl and got into the car. John and Joyce kept saying it was very odd to leave at that time of night, but they were so glad I was really leaving. They did not protest too much. So that's Barbara Comin's Our Spoons Came from Woolworths, which for me is one of those really great reads to turn to when everything's feeling a bit too much, because it's very funny. It's written with this really light touch, and although rather terrible things do happen in the book, it has a very bracing, positive attitude to life, and our heroine, Sophia, does mostly manage to sail through. It does slightly have a similar kind of vibe to I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which is another great favourite, which is a really good book to turn to when things are feeling like they're all getting a bit too much. So there's a few more that I'd love to mention, but do also please give me any comments of books that you love. We've had a few already, ones that you would turn to when things are getting too much. Sharon, who's just joined earlier, mentioned when I was doing a preamble on the topic that The Secret Garden is a book that she turns to when things are all getting a bit too much and she's feeling like she needs a duvet day. And I too adore that book and think it's absolutely brilliant and perfect to turn to when things are seeming like they're too much, because frankly for the poor girl Mary, who is the heroine of that book, things really are too much. Her whole family dies of cholera. She is sent to a new place to live in the middle of freezing Yorkshire dales, massive great house. She's the only child there. Everything is pretty awful, but then gradually things start coming to life around her and she discovers the secret garden and new life is born. And it's a very heartening, brilliant and positive book. So thank you, Sharon, for mentioning that. Weirdly, a book that also came to mind when I was thinking about books to read when things feel like they're too much is Natalie Haynes's A Thousand Ships, which is a book in which there's a lot of death and tragedy. So one might think that it's a book that's not perfect for when you're feeling overwhelmed. But for me, that's the very reason that I think it's a great read, because it's all about terrible things happening, very strong women who don't exactly rise above the events. They deal with them as they have to, quite often being sacrificed, like Iphigenia, or being brutally murdered, or seeing their own children being murdered, like Hecuba, and so on, because this is all the stories from Homer's Odyssey being retold by the women in the story. And so we get all of those women's stories. And for some reason, even though it is really quite grim, frequently gory, and full of sad tales of what it was like to be a woman at the time of Homer writing, or at the time of the Odyssey, there's something about the way it's written which is very uplifting. I think Natalie Haynes is an absolutely brilliant writer, and it is actually funny. Natalie Haynes is also a comedian, but also it's just great stories. So each chapter is a different story about a different woman from the Odyssey, who's sort of on the outskirts of the Odyssey. but they also weave through the book. So you do see Cassandra, for instance, who's the prophetess doomed never to be believed, and she comes back and forth through the story. So lots of the heroines are seen again, and it does weave together to tell one coherent tale. So I do think that's another great one to read when things are getting a bit too much. Nikki, thanks for joining us, of Inspirational Breathing, is saying Tale of Two Cities on Audible, read by Andrew Sachs. Thanks for that. That's a really excellent recommendation. I'm imagining that you're enjoying the whole experience of being read to on Audible by a great actor, as well as it being a brilliant story. And I have to say, that's a book that I've never listened to. I've read years ago, but haven't tried on Audible. So thanks for that recommendation. I'm definitely going to try that. And I imagine it would be very soothing. I do love Dickens and think that he is actually a great person to read when things are getting too much, because you know where you are with a Dickens story. I know not everyone loves Dickens. Quite a few people, perhaps, who haven't read him ever, or maybe read him as a child, might have been put off at school, might not love him. But I totally agree. He is a genius. And Nikki's also saying that he has a wonderful, Andrew Sachs has a wonderful voice, which, so I'm definitely sold on that. Thank you very much. That's a really good suggestion. And actually, that does lead me to think we must talk more about listening to books on audio, because I do think definitely when things are all getting a bit too much, listening to a great book on audio, there's nothing like it. It really does calm you down, soothe you, particularly if it is someone with a fantastic voice. And actually, probably my most recent top amazing read listening to was Damon Galgut's The Promise. And now I'm really annoyingly having a blank on the actor, who's an absolutely brilliant South African actor who read The Promise. If anyone's able to quickly look that up and put that on the comments, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Because I'm embarrassed not to remember his name. So yeah, audiobooks, great idea for something to read when you're feeling like everything is too much. Anne Waring, thanks for your excellent recommendation, Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which is a really beautiful book. Anne is saying it's funny and sad at the same time, with a lovely intimacy to it as well. That's a really mind-blowing book, which is fabulous. I have to agree. And I'm sort of looking around for it because I've got a copy of it somewhere. And it is a very sad book, because it is all about a woman who does have mental health issues and anxiety, and well, I don't think it is anxiety really, it's more just an inability to cope, and she definitely feels like everything's all too much quite often. But she's such a fantastic character. I absolutely love her, and she is someone that you completely fall in love with. Sorrow and Bliss, Meg Mason. And I love all the relationships in that book that she has with the man that loves her and with her parents. They're all really great relationships, brilliantly told, and that's a one that I totally recommend. Katie from Book Club Review Podcast, thanks for joining us. Yeah, you made it. Well done. Peter Noble, thanks so much for telling me the name of the actor who narrated The Promise, which is absolutely brilliant. And Peter Noble, fantastic actor. I really think he was doing acrobatics with his ability to capture everyone's voices in that book, The Promise, because the narrator's changing all the time. You never know quite whose head you're in, and he managed to turn somersaults, getting into people's heads and using his voice incredibly cleverly. And Kate, you're now asking, have you done Piranesi? Something about being in that world. I didn't want to leave. I completely agree. Piranesi was totally my favourite book of lockdown. And I absolutely loved the world that Susanna Clarke created there and wanted to stay in it forever. And I actually ended up listening to that book 4 times and reading the book twice because it was just so compelling. And there's something about the puzzle of the book that you'd want to keep solving. You really don't understand what's going on for quite a long time in the book. So you do keep going back to it to rediscover what on earth is going on. But also, it is a book where you want to wander down those halls. It's literally the world that she creates with the amazing pavements underwater, the tides, the hallways, the passageways. Um, and it's utterly compelling. And all the statues as well. I love the statues. In fact, I'm going to have to read it again because it's been a long time now since I read it, at least a year. I'm going to go back to it. So, yeah, thanks a lot for reminding me of that. That is such a brilliant read. And I actually do think it's one of those ones that is perfect for when you are feeling like everything is too much because it takes you to a place of calm and a place far away from reality, a place far away from anything relating to anything that might be making you worried, frankly. And Katie's also commenting, I love that once you've read it, you can go back there anytime in your mind. I totally agree. That's the genius of that book, that you can go back into that place which was created by Susanna Clarke, because you've pictured it in your mind so very clearly when you're reading it. Probably everyone has a very different picture of what it is, and I'd love to know what your picture of that book, of that world is, the house. As opposed to mine. We probably have very different imaginary conceits of what that place looks like. We should compare sometime. And because we each have that unique place in our minds, we can go back to that exact place very easily because we created it through the medium of Susanna Clarke creating it for us. And she probably has a very different idea of what it looks like herself as well. That's the beauty of fiction, and that's why it's always better to read the book than watch the film. I'm actually getting really hot, so I'm going to have to take off this blanket because despite the fact that I'm trying to recreate a duvet day, it's all too hot. Another book I would love to mention that I think is great for when you're feeling like everything is too much is the classic The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, which is an absolutely beautiful book, and I know I have talked about it here before. Tell me if you've read it. I'd love to know. It's so good. It's set in the 1930s, and it's about two English women who are having a slightly depressing spring afternoon in Hampstead, and they are walking around feeling a bit sad and sorry for themselves. They're in their 30s, so they're really quite um, ancient for those times, feeling like they're kind of past it. They've been married for ages. They feel like their life is pretty much over. Good. I'm glad that lots of you are saying that you love it. And it's one of those books that I think you can definitely keep going back to. And for people that don't know it, these two women see an advert for an Italian castle. Just read the advert because it always makes me feel a tingle of joy just reading that ad. To those who appreciate wisteria and sunshine, small medieval Italian castle on the shores of the Mediterranean, to be let furnished for the month of April. Necessary servants remain, said Box 1000, The Times. Who could resist such an advert, I ask you? And these two women do resist it for a bit because they don't have any money and they feel like it would be very bad to go out without their husbands to Italy. But that's what they do. And off they go, and they do have a really fabulous time. And I think probably everyone watching has read the book, but if you haven't, I would definitely say it's one you must return to, or you must read for the first time. A book and an author that I also frequently read in times when I'm feeling like everything's getting a bit too much is Carl Hyarson, whose name I may well be pronouncing wrong. I think it might be Hyarson. In your to be read pile, says Anne. I love his books. They're hilarious. He's very irreverent. All his books are set in Florida, and he writes very much about um, environmental issues. He's clearly very much obsessed and desperate to keep Florida beautiful and to stop it being destroyed by the terrible, greedy tourist industry and people that don't care about nature in any way. So, in all of his books, he always has someone who's an evildoer who's in some way about to destroy a beautiful aspect of the environment, like a particular part of the Everglades, or is about to threaten an endangered species. And then he always has a kind of environmental hero who is going to save the day. And this book, Skin Tight, is a particularly good one, which I'll just read you the blurb on the back. Somebody wants Mick Stranahan dead. He knows because he's just had to spear an intruder with a stuffed marlin's head. And that wasn't the first time. There was the plastic surgeon with extremely shaky hands, the personal injury lawyer with the beaming billboard face, the vanity crazed star of TV's In Your Face, and the high stepping hitman with the moonscape skin. Not to mention the barracuda. The whole thing is downright harrowing. It's Hyarson at his best, and life without him would be a pale imitation. So that's Carl Hyarson, such a brilliant writer. He actually writes great books for kids as well, which are always very environmentally interesting too. And he just creates this brilliant world, all set in Florida, very much based on real life, but just uh, made a little bit more extreme, which is what makes them so good and so funny and touching very many nerves. Yeah, if you've never read him, definitely find him. He really is an absolute classic and really makes me laugh. And I had the joy and fun of recently doing a bibliotherapy session with a lady in Florida who was full of great stories. And she said that she quite frequently sees Carl Hyarson in her local bookshop. And that's just incredibly exciting. And I feel I've got to go and visit that bookshop ASAP. So I am a major fan of Carl Hyarson, I must say. Another book that I wanted to mention, I'm just looking for, which is a slightly different type of book for when you're feeling like everything's a bit too much, is Umberto Eco, The Island of the Day Before, which is a very kind of cerebral read, I have to say. Umberto Eco is famous for The Name of the Rose, which is an absolutely brilliant book, which I'd also say is a fantastic one to read when things are feeling like they're too much, because it's very gripping and pacey and full of wonderful ideas about books as well. And a lot of it is set in a library too, in a monastery. What more can you want out of a really exciting thriller? This book, on the other hand, is much more philosophical, and it's all set on the island of the day before, where our hero is trying to get from a boat to an island, but he can't swim. And I'll just read you a little bit of it. There's something very magical and very calming about the book, but it is also, to be honest, quite baffling. It's a book which I really don't know what it's all about, but I just love it and keep wanting to go back to it and read it again. Whereas The Name of the Rose is comparatively very straightforward. This one feels like it has all the answers of the universe in it, if only you could get to the bottom of it. The year is 1643. Roberto, a young nobleman, survives war, the Bastille, exile, and shipwreck as he voyages to a Pacific island straddling the date meridian. There he waits now alone on the mysteriously deserted Daphne, separated by treacherous reefs from the island beyond, the island of the day before. if he could read it, time and his misfortunes might be reversed. But first, he must learn to swim. So that's the premise of the book. And he's literally waiting on the date meridian. It's all about crossing time and the idea of being able to go backwards in time. If anyone's read it and they can explain it to me, I would love you to do that. I've read it more than once. I think I've read it 3 times, and I still don't really understand what it means. But I love reading it because, a bit like Piranesi, it's a book that you want to keep going back to and trying to discover what it's all about and what is that meaning behind the words and the ideas. And it's a very still book, despite what it says on the back. It says, thrillingly plotted, engrossing, funny, and moving. The Island of the Day Before is Umberto Eco's first novel to date. I wouldn't call it thrillingly plotted. It seems to me that almost nothing actually does happen in this book because the hero spends pretty much the whole time on the deck of the deserted Daphne trying to get to an island and figuring out how he's going to do it and figuring out philosophically how he's going to cross the date meridian. But it's a book that's a bit like A Gentleman in Moscow, another one which would be great for this topic, in which, although the premise seems very boring, in The Gentleman in Moscow, he's stuck in a hotel for 30 years in one room. And in this one, he's lying on the deck in the sun on a boat that has no one else on it for several months. It still manages to be a gripping and fascinating and oddly thrilling book. And The Gentleman in Moscow, I'm sure most of you have read, which is another fantastic read. And you'll know that it's really brilliant because there's so many reminiscences and flashbacks, and it all becomes exciting at the end as well. And that's the same idea in this book. So, other books you might read, thinking about books to turn to when you're feeling like everything is a bit too much. Some people love to turn to romantic fiction. I was talking to the group that I had a workshop with today, the social workers, and one of them said that she loves reading Mills and Boon books, or she used to love them a lot. Then she got married, and then she had the real thing instead. However, Mills and Boon does have its place in the world of books to read when things are feeling like it's all too much for you, or an equivalent of Mills and Boon. So, a great piece of romantic fiction. Jojo Moyes, gotta love her. She's someone that I very happily read when I need an escape, and I absolutely love The Giver of Stars. I also love The 1+1, and of course Me Before You. But she's written a lot of great reads, and you always know with her that you're in really good hands and that ultimately things are going to turn out for the best. And that's what we want when we're reading books, to make us feel like everything isn't all too much and that we can find solace in a good read. One other that I want to mention for this topic, though, is Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is another book that I do read when I'm feeling like everything's a bit overwhelming and I can't quite cope with the world. Because in Ovid's Metamorphoses, you have lots of different stories, and those stories are familiar to me because they're all stories from ancient Roman and Greek mythology. So there's the familiarity of the stories, like the stories of Echo and Narcissus, but there's also very much the motif of life being in a circle and continuing, and people going from life to death and to life again. So women who are on the verge of being raped by Zeus, for instance, manage to turn at the last minute into a tree or into a stream, and so they escape the ravages of a deity. which I know is not a comforting idea, but what is comforting about it is the idea that people move from one state to another and that everything is always in a state of flux. So when things are feeling like they might be a bit too much, you can turn to Ovid and see this ancient world of streams and satyrs and gods and trees which were once women who've changed into dryads, and they're just great, comforting stories. I think, I mean, it's a different kind of book to A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes, but there's the main similarity is that it's many stories woven together, and that's what I love about it as well. It's a great book to dip into because when you're feeling like everything's become a bit too much, then reading shorter stories and books with bite-sized chunks can be really helpful. Just have to have a little sip of tea while I think about that. And people that have just joined, do say if you have any books that you turn to when you feel like everything's getting a bit too much. Do you go back to childhood favourites, for instance, or do you have a particular genre of book? Might be crime fiction, might be historical fiction. A lot of people read that as a comfort, or particular authors. I, of course, must mention good old Tove Jansson, who regular listeners will know is my go-to comfort read in all hours of need. And these are the classic ones from my childhood. And just frankly, looking at them, having the box of books in my hand is enough to make me feel far more positive about life. And because I can just be transported to Moomin Valley, a bit like being transported to um, Piranesi's world that we were talking about earlier, a very different kind of world, but the Moomin Valley is a really lovely place where we know that everything is gorgeous, the sun is always shining, or the snow is snowing thickly and people are huddling up and hibernating in their lovely Moomin house around the stove with the Moomin ancestor living behind the stove. So that's why I love the Moomins. Kate is mentioning Georgette Heyer, who is a great writer for turning to for comfort because she writes epic, romantic, brilliant, and feisty women who are also great to read at times um, when you're feeling like everything outside is all a bit horrifying. Laughing John, thanks for your comment. A book with blank pages is good if it's all too much. That's an interesting thought. Maybe that's a moment that you should start writing your own story. I wonder if that's what you mean. And maybe that is true, that what we should be doing when we're feeling like it's all too much, rather than reading an amazing novel or a comforting novel, is trying to write down our own thoughts. Um, I wonder if any of you have ever done that. And if so, how has it turned out? Let me know. So I'm doing a slightly shorter session tonight because I actually do have lots on, and I'm going to. I've got lots of things to do to prepare for tomorrow, which I won't bore you with. But so I'm going to stop any minute now, and next week I'm actually going to be in Sharjah, in the Emirates, and if I can do a session from there, I will, which would be very exciting. But I don't know if I'll be able to because they do have quite big issues with broadcasting from there, which I've had problems with that in the past. So I'll do one if I can, but if I can't do one, it's because I'm stuck in Sharjah. But I will be back the following week, and I look forward to seeing you then. I might be on Damien Barr's Facebook page that week. I'm not quite sure, but I'll let you know. I'll give you advance warning and I'll put it on my story. So thanks so much for joining me this evening. Do send me messages if you've got any great suggestions. I'd always love to hear them. And in the meantime, happy reading, happy writing, and see you very soon. Good night.